What's up guys, I'm Josh and I Lift Things. I'm here to talk about RDAs, or other governmental dietary guidelines, and why they suck. First, let me just say, it probably isn't the government's fault that their guidelines kind of suck. They have to wait for massive longitudinal studies on the under or over consumption of nutrients, they have to go through the lawmaking process, and then they have to wait for companies to actually adopt these new regulations. This is a process that can take literal decades, if you remember from my last video explaining RDAs, which you can click in the top right hand corner if you haven't seen that yet. I recommend watching it first because I'm going to use a lot of terms that you may not understand if not. So in this video, I'm just going to give some examples as to where the current guidelines seem to fall short. Keep in mind, I am not a doctor, I am just some nerd. So before you make any changes to your diet, please consult with your doctor. First off, RDAs are not intended for optimal health. They are instead intended to prevent disease. If you are a lifter, is your goal to maximize the amount of testosterone you produce? Or is it to fight off scurvy? Well, it's probably both, but it's probably more of the former, right? So let's take vitamin D for an example. The RDA of vitamin D for an adult male is 600 IUs, international units, or 15 micrograms. So why is it when you look at a supplement that they're almost always in the range of 2,000 to 5,000 IUs taken a day? Well, the National Institute of Health recommends that vitamin D serum levels not be below 12 nanograms per milliliter, but states that 20 nanograms per milliliter is good for most people. But if you go look at any forum or any place that talks about blood work for supplements, you will see that a lot of people need to take sometimes upwards of 10,000 international units a day to stay within the healthy reference range. Hell, there are people that have to take 50,000 IUs every single day to stay in reference range, and some people can't have anywhere over 2,000 every other day without feeling side effects such as insomnia or anxiousness. Supposedly, the upper tolerable limit is about 4,000 IUs a day, so what's happening here? And what about pairing it with vitamin K2? This is needed to ensure that you're moving calcium out of your blood vessels and actually moving it towards the bone, but we have no upper tolerable limit for vitamin K2. The AI for K2 is about 120 micrograms for men and 90 for women, but what about a man who weighs less or a woman who weighs more? Besides the fact, this number seems to only come from the vitamin K1 recommendations, which is purely there so that way you can actually form blood clots. But that's just one example. Well, let's talk about sodium for a second. Let's take America's sodium recommendation and compare it to a country like Japan. In the US, the RDI for sodium is 2.3 grams or 2,300 milligrams, with the American Heart Association saying that 1.5 grams is a better number, and the World Health Organization saying 2 grams is the best. They typically recommend a lower number because sodium intake is associated with higher risk of several cardiovascular diseases due to its raising of blood pressure. If we look at what the average American eats, it's estimated by the CDC to be about 3,400 milligrams a day, or about 1 gram over the RDI. Now in Japan, the average salt intake is 10 grams a day, which would result in about 3,800 milligrams per day of sodium. So they have quite a similar salt intake compared to the average American. But let's look at the death rates specifically from cardiovascular disease. In 2020, coronary heart disease deaths in Japan reached 14.84% of all total deaths, making it the leading cause of death. Japan ranked number 3 in the world for most deaths from heart disease. The United States, with a very similar average salt intake, ranks at number 1 for most deaths in the world, so it has to be from our salt, right? Well, let's look at one of the lowest rated countries for death from cardiovascular disease. Iceland was ranked only 40th in the world, but when we look at their salt intake, men on average eat 9.5 grams of salt, which comes out to 3,600 milligrams of sodium. Suddenly, things don't make nearly as much sense. Well, it has to be obesity, right? I mean, all of us Americans are very fat. Currently, America rates number 12 as the most obese in the world, while Japan was listed at 185th out of the 191 listed countries. Iceland was 83rd. So, America's the fattest, but consumes the least amount of salt, but leads in heart disease rates. Japan is the skinniest, consumes the most salt, and is right behind in heart disease rates. Iceland is in the middle of the fattest and skinniest, and is in the middle of their salt intake, but it's the lowest with heart disease deaths. Things are much more complicated than simply attributing salt intake to cardiovascular disease. Studies have shown time and time again that lowering salt intake, as well as upping potassium, lowers blood pressure in both healthy and hypertensive groups. So what gives? We have places like the National Institute of Sports Nutrition and the American College of Sports Medicine recommending 500 milligrams of sodium both pre and post exercise. So that right there is 1,000 milligrams. Or 66% of what the American Heart Association recommends, only allowing 1,500 more milligrams a day from the rest of your nutrition. So, once again, the RDA isn't the end-all be-all for dietary or supplementation choices. So, the important bit, what does this mean for you? If you've watched this far, you clearly care about your health, or at least enough to optimize your diet for better performance in the gym, right? So what should you do? You should try your hardest to eat a well-rounded diet. So let's shy away from the nitty-gritty of why an RDA or RDI may potentially be incorrect. We also have to remember that some nutrients, when taken together, interfere with the bioavailability of one another. As noted earlier, vitamin D and vitamin K2 have a synergistic effect. But things like iron can block the absorption of calcium and zinc. Zinc can block the absorption of copper, and so on and so forth. Really, and this is obvious to anyone who doesn't take some arbitrary numbers on a label as gospel, we have different needs. With my size, sex, genetic predispositions, diseases, training, lifestyle habits, diet, and everything else, I have different needs than you. It's up to all of us to do our own research that is required to see what we need to eat, what we need to supplement, when to eat or supplement it, what to combine it with, and the rest. So what's a practical way to start? Track your foods using an app like Chronometer, which tells you all of your micronutrient intake for free. Don't change up your diet, just track what you are already eating and see what you are deficient in with your current diet model. Optionally, if you have the access to do so, I recommend getting blood work. You can get some done on specific nutrients that are often trouble areas for people. You could get a hormone panel to see your testosterone, both free and total. You can even use a site like 23andMe to get some type of genetic testing done to see if you have some extra methylation demands or something else. Once you've done this and you have a good idea of what you are deficient in, you can then change your diet. Eat the rainbow, or really just eat a lot of different colors of foods. And only then would I recommend using supplements to try to fill in these gaps. Do your research and see what the best chelated form of it is. Does it have to be taken with FAG? Do you have to take it on an empty stomach? Does it have to be taken so many hours before you take another supplement? This is one of the many reasons I don't recommend just a straight old multivitamin. This issue is just too complex to solve with a kitchen sink approach. If you don't want to do all of this work, well, make sure you subscribe, because I'm planning on putting out a series explaining every single supplement and every single vitamin and mineral, and hopefully should be able to offer some insight. But I warn you, a lot of the answers are still up in the air. And guys, that's the video. Hopefully this explains why you should be looking at more than just an arbitrary number of you being over or below a certain level of nutrients. Turns out we just don't know, and the government is slow in updating these things, probably for good reason. At the end of the day, if you're feeling good, maybe you're doing enough, but it doesn't mean you can't always be better. If you like this style of content, you can follow all of these social medias and join my Discord. The links are in the description. I post exercise content twice a day, every single day. If you enjoy this stuff, you can leave a comment telling me what I forgot or what I could do better on. You can even like the video. Both of those really help out the channel. You can subscribe if you want to see more of this, and you can hit the bell to get notified every time I post a video. You can share this to a buddy who may need some help. And with all that being said, thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.